Hi, everyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. We have a really fun topic for today, one of my favorite classes. And there's lots to talk about, so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Part 3 is that we get to choose how we respond. The word responsibility means that we have the ability to respond. Isn't that cool? Responsibility, I always just thought of as things that I had to do. But instead, if I really think about the ability to respond, it becomes a much more powerful word for me. Sorry, I'm trying to get this mic so that it will pick up. So we have this opportunity coming up next week. Thursday, November 20th, is our next extra credit movie. Moana will be shown in the 107 Ag Sciences and Industries building. So that's coming up. All right. And then we'll just get started. That was my only announcement for today. Learned helplessness. This is a psychological situation that happens when people find that they are unable to make change. It was first tested in dogs many years ago, back in the 1960s, when psychological experiments involved things like shocking and other terrible situations. And so understanding learned helplessness, understanding that phrase, that sometimes we get stuck in the idea that we don't have the ability to make change. And this plays into this part of the course because we've talked about some really hard and challenging things that are happening on the planet that could seem so big and so overwhelming, and that I can feel helpless. And the things I've done before haven't helped yet. And so why would I try to do them? So there's an interesting article in the module for this week about learned helplessness that you might want to check out just to think about this, where do we learn the things, whether it's that we've learned it from people that we grow up around, the people that are influential in our lives that also feel helpless, and then that attitude passes on to us, or whether it's something that we have experienced. But being aware, as we have learned, awareness is the first step that is happening, and then being able to take steps to make change comes after that. So our words and our actions do matter, right? So we've talked about this and debated a little bit of, do my small actions matter in the big scope of things? I'm going to always say yes, yes, because I want to be doing as much as I can to make positive change in the world, and not saying, well, I just gave up. That part doesn't feel so great to me. So I'm going to just keep making those little changes when I learn about things, when I become aware of things, and then I can make change for the better in my own life. So today we're going to be talking about that relative to food, our awareness about food and where it comes from, what it does. Food is about 1/3 of our ecological footprint, because not just what we are consuming, but all of the energy of what goes into what we're consuming. You may remember back to the birth and death class when we saw this slide last. Eating is receiving nutrients. Earth, water, fire, air, and space combine to make this food. We take the lives and labor of numberless beings that we may eat. May we be nourished that we may nourish life. May we be nourished so we may nourish life. So what is nourishment? That's what we're going to talk about today. What is nourishment? What has nourishment looked like for you? How have you chosen? There's all kinds of nourishment. There's spiritual nourishment, there's emotional nourishment. Today we're talking about food, physical nourishment. So what have you put into your body, and how have you chosen to do that. So I'd like you to take a moment and reflect on what you've eaten today, and how those choices have affected your body and the way that you feel. So reflect on it for a minute and then talk to your neighbor. What's nourished you today? Anybody want to talk about their nourishment story of today? It's something that that you didn't get into in your ecological footprint lab when you were talking about food and choices, is about the story. Food often carries stories for many of us. So what's the story of what you've eaten today? Anyone care to share? Okay. We can come back to more of that in a little bit. I'll give you an example. So today up here, I have this jar of coffee, and I have these cookies that I made this morning. So they're molasses cookies. Pretty good. It's one of my favorite recipes. And so the story of this nourishment goes like this, right? So my grandpa, all through my growing up, my grandpa took a break from work at 10 o'clock and a break at 2 o'clock. And he would have coffee and cookies. And so to this day now, many years into my life, I celebrate my grandpa as often as possible by eating coffee and drinking coffee and eating cookies, because it was his favorite thing. So when 2 o'clock comes, I always feel a little bit like having a coffee and a cookie. It just is part of my story that's very deep inside of me. So that ritual, right? Today, these ginger cookies, inside the ginger cookies, I have butter. In fact, I'm using plant butter because I can't have usual butter would have milk in it. Sugar and molasses come from Brazil, the sugar cane that has been harvested, milled, refined, and bleached. And then the molasses is a byproduct of that sugar processing. The egg comes from chickens and the land they were raised on, but I can't eat eggs, so I use flaxseed. So that's been grown somewhere in the United States. And then vanilla grown in Madagascar off the coast of Africa. The vanilla beans that are painstakingly grown and conditioned and soaked in vodka, which is from a different place, distillation of cereal grains or potatoes that have been fermented. That's vodka. So that's how they make vanilla beans in vodka. And then baking soda, which is man-made with a chemical reaction, or it could be mined in Colorado. And then flour, I'm gluten-free, so this is a different kind of flour. Typical flour would have wheat, grinding the berries from the wheat plant, small amounts of bleaching agents and oxidizing agents are added to the flour after milling, and then vitamins and minerals are added as required by law to produce enriched flour, which means then it has something good for us in there, because they took all the good part away in the milling process. And then ginger root, cinnamon bark, and clove buds, 3 different plants that are in the spices in my cookies. And those were all grown in tropical regions, India, China, Nigeria, Indonesia, and then they get ground up and put in the bottle that ends up in my grocery store. And then salt that's mined or produced by the evaporation of seawater. So that's in my cookies. The world is represented in my cookies. The coffee, this particular coffee is from Honduras. It was grown by a friend of my brother, actually. His name is Emilio. So this is relationship coffee to me. Emilio, once the coffee berries were ripe, they were picked and processed and dried, and then transported to my brother's coffee shop where it was roasted. And then it traveled by car 22 miles to me, where I ground them in my kitchen and then brewed the grounds with near boiling water. I added cashew milk and maple syrup that's made in Pennsylvania. So coffee plants cultivated in over 70 countries, primarily around the equator, dried coffee seeds, roasted, depending on the desired flavor. So in this, what seems like a simple snack, how many miles have these things traveled to be in my coffee and my cookies? How many people were involved in this treat that I enjoy, right? How many processes did these ingredients go through? It's kind of astounding when you start to think about it's just coffee and cookies and how beautiful that is. So my food story, the nourishment that I choose when I think about culture, food is a big part of culture. Sometimes it's a big part of religious practices, sometimes a big part of rituals, customs, right? Attitudes about food. So my food story is built on what my parents did, what food I ate when I was a kid. So that's part of my food story. I also, as you may have just picked up on, I have a lot of food sensitivities, a lot of things that I can't eat because of years of different stresses. My current family, I have 2 sons living at home, and they have very different tastes. So the food I choose is in relationship to them. I helped my dad in the garden. My great-grandma was an excellent baker, and so I always think about her when I'm making my cookies. My blood type is O positive. That influences the foods that I like and am attracted to. What I get in my CSA farm share, that changes how I eat. What portion of my budget do I spend on food? And then also access to food. Do I go to the farmer's market, the grocery store, or pick it up at local farms? So our food story, when you really start to think about how we choose what we choose, there's a lot that goes into it. What is food anyway? Right now, we have a greater diversity of foods than ever before available to us. As late as the 1990s, there were about 7,000 different products available in a grocery store, and today it's somewhere between 40 and 50,000 different products in our grocery stores. So we're going to look at food from several different angles today. So we're going to start here with potatoes. Okay, there's potatoes. So when we consider growing potatoes in our backyard garden, it's pretty simple. You cut out one of the little eyes of the potato and stick it in the ground, and that creates a new potato. So we are putting in very little energy to that growing process in our backyard, and we're getting more energy out. So 1 calorie of energy in yields 20 calories out. So that is a pretty good ratio as far as energy in versus what we get to then consume. Then if we look at grocery store potatoes, so essentially the same thing because they're still potatoes that have been grown, but they've been grown somewhere else, and now they're packed in these plastic nylon whatever bags that you get at the grocery store. And so it changes 1 calorie of energy in, and you or excuse me, 5 calories of energy in, 1 calorie of energy out. And then going to the next phase, we got French fries and all of the different processes the fries go through to be started as potatoes and going to fries. Then we're getting 1 calorie of energy, out for every 10 calories that we put in. So we're changing that ratio of value of energy. And then when we get to this, then it's 20 calories of energy in for 1 calorie of food out. So there's this ratio. Why is that happening? What's increasing the energy in? Anybody want to take not necessarily a guess, but anybody want to answer that question? The energy in? The energy in is directly related to all of the possible machinery that are used to create those different foods, right? So potato chips start as potatoes and then they get taken to the factory where they get sliced and fried. All of those different processes are dependent on fossil fuels. So that's why there's less energy that we're getting out of each of those things. The growing techniques, the transportation, the processing machines, the packaging machines, and then more transportation to get them to the stores. So when you're growing potatoes pretty simply in your backyard, they don't have to have any of those processes before you eat them. So it's something to consider then also how the return on investment. Thinking about that, homegrown potatoes are pretty close to $0 a pound. You can buy 1 potato and that will plant, they usually have 6 or 7 eyes, that will plant 6 or 7 plants, which then yield potatoes under each one. So it's pretty close to $0 per pound. Store-bought fresh potatoes, 40 cents a pound, and then on up to when there's not a pound of Pringles in a can. I think it's only 6 ounces or something like that. So when you're considering how much you're spending for the calories that you're taking in, what's the best nourishment for the money? What's the best choice? If you're trying to save money and get food, what are you going to choose? Okay. So you don't need to burn the dollars where they don't need to be spent if you're looking for that nourishment. As I said, we have this 40 to 50,000 products in the grocery store these days, and many of them are food-like substances, things that started as plants and then got processed to the extent that it's even hard to figure out what the original plant was. So Cheerios are made of oats, but in order to process those oats, they've ground them up and they've taken all the good stuff out, all of the wheat germ, all of the oat germ out, because that might rot in the box and you don't want to open it up and have rotten cereal. You want your cereal to be able to stay on the shelf for a long, long time without being degraded. And so they take out the healthy part and then they enrich it with those vitamins, like I mentioned earlier, putting things back in. So while whole potatoes are food, those potato products are more like food-like substances. They've taken out a lot of it through the processing, which leads to less nutritional value. More of the additives and preservatives and human-made sweeteners, like I mentioned back during the chemical class. One tip that really helped me, this is just a little side note, is if you shop the outside of the store, you're going to find mostly real foods. So if you think about that in your grocery store, walking in, finding the fruits and vegetables, and then going across the back, you're going to find the meat aisle, the eggs, and then down the other side is often the dairy products. So more real food on the outer sides of the grocery store than in the aisles. And that's for those of us who can find good grocery stores, that we have access to grocery stores. There are people in our country that do not have that access. This map shows food deserts, places where people don't have a car and there's no supermarket store within a mile. So the densest, the darkest colors are where 10% of people live and don't have access to fresh food. So food deserts, geographic areas where residents have few to no convenient options for securing affordable and healthy foods. So often high poverty areas are really challenged. Could be in cities, could be out in the country. This affects people in different ways. But then it disproportionately is found in high poverty areas. These food deserts create extra hurdles for people that are already struggling when they can't find real food. So more than 40 million people in the United States live without access to supermarkets or other stores selling real food, fruits and vegetables particularly, because they require special treatment, special refrigeration trucks to get places, and then those places need to have places to store them. It just becomes quite a challenge. Except that the fact is that there is enough, listen, there is enough food for everyone on the planet to lead a healthy and nutritious life, but the global food supply is deeply inequitable. So there is enough food for 8 billion people. The research has been done, but where the food is and getting food to people is the challenge. That's the part that is unfair, deeply inequitable. So then we learn this, that food takes up more space in US landfills than anything else. Food waste generates 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. So the production of wasted food in the US alone is equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions of 37 million cars. So that food, when it gets thrown into the trash, it starts to rot and creates methane. That methane is going into the atmosphere and affecting what we talked about before as far as greenhouse gases. Nearly 40 million tons, or 30 to 40% of the entire US food supply, is discarded by Americans every year. So when I think about, my kids, when I buy food for them at the grocery store and it's not exactly what they want and it goes to waste in my refrigerator or my pantry, then I'm wasting that. It could have been going to somebody else, but instead I've taken it in and now it is not getting used. That food then gets discarded. About 1/3 of all food produced around the world is wasted. So this feels a little bit ridiculous to me, thinking about how our food systems work around the globe. So it's for your consideration of how much food are you taking onto your plate, and then how much food is not being eaten, is a really interesting question and something to reflect upon. I have a friend that in college, he would get a hamburger and then he would eat everything but the very last part that his fingers touched. And that always got thrown away. And so when I inquired from, like, what's that about? He's like, well, my fingers touched that. I said, well, your fingers touched the whole burger. And then it came to light as we talked about it that he realized that every time he was taking more food than he could actually eat. And that was the part that he had an excuse for leaving that part behind. So considering how we consume the food that we take is really important. The class about food wouldn't be very complete if we didn't consider this question. What about meat? Maybe you already talked about this, some in your eco footprint lab, because when we add meat to our diet, then it increases our ecological footprint, the resources that meat takes. 41% of the US land in the contiguous 48 states are used for pastures and animal feed production. So let me say that again. 41% of our land in the United States, the contiguous United States, 41% is used for meat production. It's growing the animals and then growing the food that the animals need. Even as more Americans ever report reducing their meat consumption, the US remains the highest per capita consumer of meat worldwide. Nearly 9.5 billion animals are slaughtered in the US annually. As an animal consumes 10 calories, we get 1 calorie out, and so we're losing 90% of the energy. So it's a very complex thing to tackle, this consumption of meat. So one side, there are people that are vegetarians, vegans, and they talk about the benefits of that. And then the other side, the meat eaters, talk about the benefits of that way of being. So both sides focus on being right. So where is there a middle ground? So I'm about to show a video that comes with a trigger warning. It is of the meat industry, and I appreciate that you take it in if you so choose. If you don't choose, then you can step out for 4 minutes and then step back into the classroom. So we'll go ahead. Will you start this video, please, Abby?
chicken stuff.
So numbers of animals killed each year for food worldwide: 75 billion chickens, 1.3 billion ducks, etc., 1.4 billion pigs, 308 million cows. So why, let's see, Americans eat on average 224 pounds of meat per person per year. So why does this make a significant environmental difference? Meat uses so much more energy to grow than vegetables or fruits. So there's water pollution, there's land use and deforestation, climate change, all of the methane, the greenhouse gases that are coming to fruition to make things happen. It takes 284 gallons of oil to raise one cow. Processing, packing, and shipping, store refrigeration, home refrigeration, preparation of that meat. To put all that into context, the American meat consumer expends the same amount of fossil fuels annually for meat as they would driving 16,720 miles. So all the fossil fuels that go into the production of that. I added in the module an article about slaughterhouse workers. It's important to note all those people that are working to bring that meat to our plates, right? The 9.5 billion animals that are slaughtered in the US annually, who is killing them? In an average cattle slaughterhouse, the employee tasked with firing the bolt gun that kills or incapacitates each cow sees about 2,500 animals per day, a rate of one cow every 12 seconds to kill. Violent, physically demanding work, high rates of serious injuries in slaughterhouses, high pressure, repetitive, strenuous work, elevated risk for infection, psychological toll of needing to disassociate themselves from their work so they don't feel guilty. It's pretty violent feeling. Higher aggression, higher anxiety, hostility, PTSD, higher substance abuse and addiction, higher arrest rates. So there's the environmental impact, there's the social and human impact, and then there's the animal impact. So it brings together a lot of things that we've been talking about over the course of the semester. And then we come to this question that I asked you back in week 7. Why care? Some of you at the retreat, I was excited that you were thinking about this already. And some of you asked me if I eat meat. And I can tell you about how I approach this choice in my life. So I do eat meat, chicken primarily, and occasionally beef. I have collagenous colitis, which means I can't properly digest beans or peas or dairy or eggs. And so meat is how I get my protein. I don't have another choice. I'm struggling to make insects part of my diet, like I told you back in that class. Maybe someday, when it is readily available, I'll be ready for it. So to get the protein I need for my body to function properly, I am stuck with meat. So when I buy it, I make a valiant attempt to get it locally from farms that I know the farmers. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I've researched seafood and I struggle to find a source that's wise for that. My nutritionist has said I should eat salmon once a week. So I do that, but there's wild caught, there's farm raised. From the research, I found wild caught is actually better environmentally. If you're curious about this, you can do some more research too. So I very rarely choose pork because I hang out with pigs. I volunteer on a farm that has pigs. This is Julia. And we're friends. I see how intelligent they are. They know who I am. And I know that I share 98% of my DNA with them. And so I can't eat pork. So choices that we have and the choices that we make, that each of you will make, have to be dependent on your story, all those different parts of your life that come together to create your nourishment story. The story of our current agriculture in the United States takes its roots back to the late Earl Butz. He worked under President Nixon. He was appointed Secretary of Agriculture in 1971 and held the position for 5 years. It was under his rule, his law, that domestic farm policies shifted to favor large industrial operations, planting mostly corn and soy, and to shun the smaller farms that plant organic, locally sold crops. And that legacy has continued to this day, over 50 years of degraded soil, excessive water use, and heavy use of pesticides and herbicides. So since then, the prevailing mantra of farming in America is get big or get out. So science has refined and come to understand ways that are better than this, and yet this continues as our major approach to farming. So what we have the opportunity to do is be aware. We can be aware of other stories that are happening. There are some movements that are going on. So there are people who define themselves as locavores, so not omnivore or carnivore, locavore, meaning that they eat food that is local. So aiming to connect food producers and consumers in the same geographic region in order to develop more self-reliance and resilient food networks, improving local economies that affect health, environment, community, and society of a place. So that's an option. Eating organic. What is organic? Organic farming methods combine scientific knowledge of ecology and modern technologies with traditional farming practices based on basic biological processes. Fertilizers of organic origin, manure, compost, bone meal. Crop rotation is a strategy that they use, companion planting, biological pest control. So organic means that there just aren't the chemicals going into the soil, into the food that we're growing. It promotes fair relationships and a good quality of life for all involved. Where do you find this? You can find this at the farmer's market that's downtown twice a week. At these farmers markets, it's interesting to note that there are some real benefits, not just getting food that's local, reducing fossil fuels, but there are, well, let me ask you, how many of you have shopped at a farmer's market? Yay, that's exciting, lots of you. Can somebody tell me what you like about shopping at the farmer's market? Why do you choose that? There's somebody back there. There's the microphone.
Jen.
Okay, great. I'll be right back with you.
I feel like it's more like personal, like you can talk to the people that grew it and they can like explain the process. It's also just like better, like it tastes better.
It feels better. Yeah, you get to talk to the people that grew the food. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
I once got like a baked good from one of the farmers markets from the Amish, and I like that the ingredients list is just super like blunt. It's just like eggs, sugar, and flour, and that's it. And there's nothing else extra in there.
Yeah, that's pretty lovely. That's great. Other people? Yeah.
Produce is almost always more inexpensive if you get it from a farmer's market.
Farmers market is sometimes more or less expensive because they don't have to drive very far. They don't have all of the hidden costs of bagging and plastics and miles driven.
I like knowing that what I'm putting in my body is good for me and that I know that it's probably more real than if I was getting anything from a supermarket.
More real. That's cool. Yeah.
I like the sense of community. Like I live right by it, so I go down, I see all like old ladies from church, and I think it's just so cute.
That's sweet. It is. So that's what research shows too. You all are getting it. That feeling that you get at the farmer's market is actually been studied. And this whole idea of relationship between farmer and consumer is so much stronger. If you think about your farmer's market experience compared to your grocery store experience, it's pretty dramatically different feeling. And so the connections that are made at farmers markets are so much tighter, right? I love the farmers market and the creativity that goes into that. Also around here and everywhere across the country, there is community supported agriculture where you could have a work share at these places, at these farms. So you work 3 to 4 hours a week and you come home with a box of veggies like this. So not only do you get to work with your hands on the land, but then you get paid in vegetables that were grown on the farm. So that's stuff that's happening out there. What's happening right on campus is this compost, right? So compost, that food that you're done with, if you have extra left on your plate, then you can put it in the compost. It's a very cool system that we have here at Penn State. So it reduces methane emissions. So instead of putting it into the landfill where it's going to create those greenhouse gases when it just rots, this goes out to the university's compost facility where it gets treated and turned and then used on the flower beds all over campus to grow the beautiful flowers that we have here. That it also has this benefit of creating this whole cycle and staying very local right here on campus. The student farm is a beneficial opportunity for you if you so choose. You can reach out to Leslie Pillen. She is in charge of the student farm, and there's a great opportunity to be part of something very exciting at the student farm. When you're out there gardening and you get that dirt on your hands, there's something, I've heard this from gardeners for years, and then now, again, science has caught up to what those gardeners know. Getting in the garden and getting dirty is a natural antidepressant due to the unique microbes in healthy organic soil. Working and playing in the dirt can make you happier and healthier because of the soil microbe that's called Mycobacterium vaccae. It's found to mirror the effects on neurons in the brain like drugs like Prozac do, but without the side effects. It works, the happy microbes in the soil cause your cytokine to rise, which leads to the production of more serotonin. And we've talked about this. Serotonin makes us feel relaxed and happier. It's the happy hormone inside us. So knowing that there's this bacterium that lives in the soil, you get your hands in there, you get grubby and dirty, and you get happier altogether. So there's all of these things that people have known for a long time that now science is finding the roots of. This is another one, eating together. We all eat, and it would be a sad waste of opportunity to eat badly. So the idea about eating together in community, going back to the happiness class, when people are feeling lonely or down because they don't have a true or trusted friend, eating together is a way to share that time, share those opportunities. So communal eating increases social bonding and feelings of well-being, enhances one's sense of connectedness and embedding within the community. So all of that is really valuable and important. So what things that we can do starting today is that we can reduce our food waste. We can start thinking about where our food comes from and choose accordingly. We can moderate our lust for meat. Even just meatless Mondays help the planet. Adopting something more like a traditional Mediterranean diet, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. Eating in moderation just things like poultry and eggs and cheese and yogurt. Rarely eating red meat. Don't eat added sugars, processed meat, refined grains, refined oils. So yes, as a college student, you may have limited choices. So I present this for your awareness today and for the future. Don't you find it odd that people will put more work into choosing their mechanic or house contractor than they will into choosing the person who grows their food? It's also something to note that every one of you, your majors, all can tie in to food, business, marketing, economics, all of the different things that you're doing, psychology, sociology, all of that can relate to our food industry on this planet. So as you probably saw, the Canvas discussion is awareness, thinking about your favorite food and beverage. Where did they come from? What's their story? How did you choose it? Talk a little bit, write a little bit about your connection to your favorite foods and discover something new about yourself and that connection. Thank you. I'll send you out into the world. Have a beautiful day. Hi, Andrew. How are you today?